Hi, I'm Robbie Diamond, the CEO and President of Securing America's Future Energy. Welcome to everyone who's joined us for the release of Get America Moving Again, or GAMA. We hope everyone is safe at home. And the order of today is for me to say a few remarks, have each of our members of our Energy Security Leadership Council speak. I will then review a few of the recommendations in slightly more detail, and then ultimately open this up for questions and answers. We are really thankful for you to be here. Alongside the tragic human cost of COVID-19, the fallout from the pandemic has highlighted the fragilities of our supply chains and has demonstrated how important our transportation sector to keep the economy moving and the energy sector to run our lives. As of this morning, tragically also 33 million people have lost their jobs in just the last 6 weeks as the country has ground to a halt. America can be defined as the free movement of people and goods. This is who we are and how our complex economy functions. The transportation sector's contributions to the US economy and the American way of life is tremendous and unparalleled. Each day, over 26 million children ride nearly 500 school buses. 100 million plus commuters drive to work. 24 million people ride in public transport. 2.7 million people fly on over 44,000 flights. And more than 3 million truck drivers drive over 500 million miles to deliver the goods to people and places as part of one of the most complex supply chains in the world. In response to this, we've organized and created a series of policy recommendations we are calling Get America Moving Again, GAMA, which aim to rescue and recover the current transportation system, stimulate the economy by pushing for global leadership in the transportation technologies of the future, and particularly to secure supply chains so we are not dependent in this critical industrial sector of our economy on adversaries. Now, there's a tendency in these crises, as we all know, to throw money at things. And we will be spending lots of money over the coming months. So we wanted to be thoughtful and strategic when it came to spending that money in transportation and energy. It used to be after a disaster, the federal government would come in and provide assistance to rebuild, but they were not allowed to rebuild to a more resilient standard. It was to the same standard. After a rash of recent storms, including Hurricane Sandy, Congress considered using recovery money to be used to build a more resilient infrastructure. And we believe if we're going to rebuild, we should rebuild smart. There are two particular challenges I want to note that were exposed in this pandemic, besides all the ones we see every day. But the continued challenge of oil dependence, which is not always talked about since we've seen the negative $37. And we can just witness the chaos in the oil market. And as many of our speakers will speak to, this is a problem that is unsolved, and America is not the swing producer that will determine the future of prices in what is the lifeblood of our economy. And the second is our competition against China and what can happen when critical supply chains are not domestic or a part of a system with our allies. In this energy transportation landscape, these are challenges. How to stop using oil is what we're asking, or diversify our transportation fuels, and how to ensure that as we move to this electric and autonomous future, we maintain a position of global leadership, as this is the most important industrial sector of our economy. So I'm just going to spend literally 2 more minutes reviewing, very high level detail until I come back at the end. But look, we're trying to think about getting the auto moving forward with an eye to an electrified, autonomous, and shared future. Helping this transition in manufacturing in all vehicle classes and with shovel-ready projects for infrastructure. Building the supply chain in America and making sure that we're not dependent on competitors or adversaries. Providing the regulatory certainty and pathways for contactless delivery and other autonomy So we are getting people to work and goods delivered with little contact in this pandemic. This is an area where there's particular competition with China right now. Building and funding infrastructure with more flexibility for new forms of transportation, things like micromobility. Making sure we have a reliable and resilient grid to power our lives. We would not be having this call without that and the remarkable resilience that our grid has shown. And soon, this will be needed for our transportation system as well. So we cover these areas and get America moving again. With that, I'll introduce SAFE and our ESLC members. SAFE was founded in 2004 to end oil dependence for economic and national security. We continue to be focused on this mission and believe, as I said before, that the last month has only shown us once again why we need to solve this problem, diversify away from oil as the only transportation fuel. Our ESLC members who are joining us, Admiral Dennis Blair, Adam Goldstein, and Mark Joseph, thank you all very much. Admiral Blair was the former National Intelligence Director and Commander of the Pacific Command, one of our original ESLC members. Adam Goldstein is the former Vice Chair of Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. Another original ESLC member who had the unfortunate lot to sit next to me at Davos one day when I was able to recruit him. And finally, Mark Joseph, who is an advisor, founder of Mobitas Advisors, but also the former CEO of Transdev North America, which is the largest multimodal company in the world, so understands how to get people moving in planes, trains, buses, ferries, and every other means of transportation. With that, I will turn it over to Admiral Blair. Thank you very much, Admiral Blair, for joining us.
Thanks, Robbie. Good morning to everyone on the call. There's been an awful lot of news coming at us fast and furious over these last several weeks with the pandemic and the economic effects of it. But taking a step back and looking from the national security point of view, it's just remarkable how for the last several weeks the United States has been jacked around by hostile countries. The Saudis and the Russians have been manipulating the oil market for their purposes, and the result has been unprecedented volatility that hurts U.S. oil producers, American consumers, and American businesses. Our president has been reduced to cutting deals with two dictatorships, one of which tried actively to undermine the results of our last presidential election, and the other of which has been involved in fostering the sort of religious extremism that led to the 9/11 attacks. But there we are. Meanwhile, with the United States suffering the most of any country in the world from this pandemic, China, another country hostile in many ways to American interests, has taken control of the global supply chains that run through its territory to deny us medical supplies, while at the same time making aggressive moves in East Asia against our interests, as well as our allies and friends there. So how many more lessons do we need about the dangers of putting our security in the hands of countries that do not share our values or interests and are actually actively trying to undercut us? We need to change this situation. So our recommendations are aimed at using this recovery from the current crisis to make our country more independent, less dependent in particular on international hostile competitors. As Robbie mentioned, we concentrate on the transportation and energy sectors and the electrical grid. These are really the foundations of our economy and our way of life. We advocate a series of actions that will increase the diversity of energy sources in the transportation sector, which is currently over 90% dependent on oil. And it's this enormous transportation sector dependence that keeps our military forces patrolling the Middle East and the oil supply routes from there and other areas of the world, and condemns us to the economic penalties of volatile oil prices, no matter how much we produce ourselves. Now, electric vehicles are the primary near-term route to diversity. There may be others in the future, but for now, many of our proposals are aimed at increasing the electrical vehicle and the autonomous vehicle share of our transportation system. Several of our recommendations are also to increase the safety and resilience of the national electrical grid, as well as extending the charging system for electrical vehicles. This is one of the primary barriers to wider adoption. A secure and more resilient electrical grid not only underpins a more diversified transportation sector, but other vital economic sectors, including a strong information infrastructure, which has been a very important feature in dealing with this pandemic, and the healthcare system, which has, of course, been the other important feature. So moving to more diverse transportation sector based on electrical vehicles is a good thing, but China has set its sights on dominating this global electrical vehicle industry, and in fact has jumped to an early lead in such areas as batteries and electrical buses and the global supply chains that underpin those. So another set of our recommendations are aimed at supporting the US lead in technology, in ensuring that essential supply chains, such as those in batteries, do not become Chinese monopolies, and helping the United States retain and in fact increase the lead in the international electrical vehicle industry, as we have in the past in the gasoline internal combustion transportation industry. And unless we make these smart policies now, we risk trading dependence on Saudi and Russian policies and decisions for dependence on Chinese policies and decisions. We need to act smart at this point. So a large part of these recommendations that we make this morning are to take advantage of recovering from the current crisis, which we'll do, but to do so in a way that makes the United States stronger, safer in the long term, and means that we control our destiny, not countries that are hostile to our interests. Let me turn it over then to Adam Goldstein. Adam.
Thank you very much, Admiral Blair. You heard Robbie say that both Admiral Blair and I have been members of the ESLC from the beginning. And coming from the business side to the ESLC, it has been and continues to be an enormous privilege to work with Admiral Blair and his colleagues from the military. So to continue with what the Admiral was saying, the pandemic and US investment and economic recovery from the pandemic raised fundamental issues of resilience. At SAFE and at the ESLC, we are advocating for a broader definition of resilience, a definition that includes the resilience of the energy and transport sectors in order to get America moving again and to keep it moving optimally into the future. Let's start with trucks. Optimizing efficiencies are critical for our heavy-duty transportation sector. As you heard, more than 3 million truck drivers drive over 30 million trucks over 500 million miles every day. And although class 3 to 8 vehicles, in other words, the largest 6 classes of vehicles, comprise just 3.6% of vehicles on the road, they account for 27% of the oil used in the US transportation sector. And then there are more than 500,000 buses. So there's also a need to transition our nation's school bus fleet towards electrification. 480,000 yellow school buses take 25 million American children to and from school every day, among other things, exposing them to harmful diesel emissions. In fact, clear air in urban centers worldwide, as you probably all know, has been noted as traffic has slowed, and electrification is the solution to keep both our economy and our workers moving while also maintaining this cleaner and clearer air. So Get America Moving Again, our GAMMA program, contains policies that can accelerate this shift towards an optimized and more resilient transportation system. The Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program, or ATVM, has a track record of producing results in emerging technology ventures and is a proven mechanism for supporting the expansion of domestic auto manufacturing. ATVM has contributed to a total of 17 facilities being built or retrofitted in 9 states, leading to the direct employment of 38,000 Americans in automotive manufacturing. And 98% of all ATVM loans to date have been repaid. And yet, there's still $16.5 billion left that cannot be used by truck and bus manufacturers. ATVM loans should therefore be expanded beyond personal vehicles to manufacturing facilities for medium and heavy duty AFVs, and also for autonomous vehicles, micromobility devices, and their associated components. Additionally, expanding the popular low or no emission vehicle grant program to include heavy duty vehicles can expedite the electrification of our nation's 49,000 transit buses, as well as the 480,000 school buses. Moreover, medium and heavy duty vehicles are not covered by tax credits that encourage adoption and defray upfront purchasing costs. Establishing a 30% tax credit for the purchase of new class 4 to 8 electric and alternative fuel vehicles that will be used exclusively for commercial purposes would help drive such vehicle adoption. So these are steps that in one sector of the transportation system, if we would advance the GAMA program, would have a significant impact on reducing the oil intensity of our economy and protecting the nation's security in the ways that Admiral Blair delineated. So thank you, and on that note, I will turn it over to Mark Joseph.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks to all of our leaders at SAFE and the Energy Security Leadership Coalition for what you're doing to help lead America and get America moving again. I'm pleased to join all of you who are attending today as we think about this important topic of resilience and how we can get our transportation systems moving again, especially those essential systems that can get us to a better place. I believe firmly that this is an opportunity not only to reshape and restructure those systems, but to greatly improve them and to solve problems that have existed for quite a while now, including some significant inefficiencies in those systems. On the best of days, in the best economy, our transit systems had a great number of routes that were inefficient with low ridership. And we have the opportunity now and the political will now to see some of those systems to be greatly improved. And we can follow what other cities have done around the world to take the leadership in this moment to bring about a new and more efficient transportation system, which can greatly improve the quality of our air and the quality of our opportunity to improve the economy. Take, for instance, London. Right now, London has announced the Mayor's Streetscape program. The public transportation system in London is one of the best in the world, and it's operating at 1/5 of its capacity to handle 8 million trips per day. And as the mayor has said, that if a fraction of the people who were riding the public transportation system move to their automobiles, then the city will grind to a halt. So what they have done is they have moved quickly to create temporary networks for cycling and for walking. And they anticipate with the TfL, the Transportation for London modeling, that post-COVID, we will see somewhere around 10 times the number increase in the kilometers cycled and 5-time increase in the amount of walking in the city of London. If we look to Milan, a very dense city at 1.4 million population in a relatively small area, end to end about 15 kilometers, they have announced that they are transforming 22 miles, 35 kilometers of cycling lanes with an average speed or a speed up to 20 miles an hour. The deputy mayor, Granelli, said that they've worked for years to reduce car use. And if everyone drives a car in Milan, there's no space to move. And now they believe that when they reopen the economy, they can do it in a different way and a better way than before. So we've seen some opportunities. We've also seen what the early indications look like from China and what China has done what we can learn from China and what we can avoid. First of all, in the case of China, a global executive of one of the largest PE firms announced this week that the car use in China has increased by 11% already since the reopening of their economy just in the last few weeks. That comes at the expense, to a great extent, of the public transportation system, where ridership is down by about 50% on their transit. At the same time, China has led the way in electrification. We can see in cities like Shenzhen, over 99% of their buses, over 30,000 buses in one city alone, have moved to electric buses. And China and Europe are leading the way in the electrification of their buses. Here in the US, I think we have reached the tipping point where we're starting to see a real commitment to electrifying the buses. Adam spoke about the opportunity for school buses, transit buses, and these are significant areas that we should continue to move forward on at great speed. I'd like to talk a little bit about micromobility and the opportunity here. We have the opportunity to understand, first of all, that this has been proven now that the numbers of trips that have been taken in the US are a very significant portion of the transportation business, and post-COVID will increase even more. That necessitates that we look at not only how we can coordinate and integrate these services between micromobility and transit and create portal-to-portal solutions, but that we offer these kind of efficient, both in terms of traffic congestion and in terms of pollution, efficient solutions, and dedicate more road networks, figure out how we're going to manage sidewalks, and offer new alternatives to get our folks moving again at very, very low cost. This means that we could offer opportunities for electric mobility vehicles in the way of rebates to consumers. We could help low income and other disadvantaged individuals and folks just trying to get to work an opportunity to give them a subsidy or a rebate for a new micromobility device of 30% or $500, whichever is less. I think this is a very practical solution that could be implemented almost immediately. We've also seen the pandemic increase the demand for worldwide usage of contactless driver delivery. Delivery vehicles. This is autonomous delivery vehicles that can be very efficient, and we will see more and more shifting of purchase of goods through these various digital platforms and the delivery of these goods using autonomous vehicles. And we should move to ensure a smooth way to manage and regulate that. So I think this is the moment now for us to take advantage of this crisis and to move quickly with some of these very practical solutions. And I will turn it back to Robbie, who will explain some of the key policies and recommendations to get America moving again. Thank you.
Thank you all. I will try to do this very quickly so we can get to questions and answers. This is not in the order that they are in the report, and I just tried to group them to give them some coherence beyond the report. So I'll sort of start with the supply chain and move from there. I also would say that most of the things in the report are about fuel neutral. So I feel that, or we feel that although we do talk about electric and autonomous, there are opportunities in other fuels, but the market is in some ways chosen. That does not mean from a policy perspective, we need to pick the winners. I think the market is sort of moving there itself, but there are little pockets of opportunity in other areas. So the first one, I would just say rare earth minerals. We should be creating a processing collective. 95% of rare earth oxides are now processed in China. Much of the reason for this is because it's so expensive. It's not that they are rare, the metals, but it's hard to get them out of the dirt. We have them in our dirt as well. We just using our capitalist system makes it more difficult. So creating a collective to make this happen happen, as well as a thorium deposit. So that's just the first step in these vehicles. There's many other steps that SAFE will be opining about in the coming weeks, but we do think this is something we can do right away. Number 2 is the light duty. Let's talk about light duties, cars, and EVs. So we should help stimulate the auto industry broadly through some type of cash for clunkers, which we recommend. Definitely putting the money to more efficient vehicles if one brings in an inefficient vehicle. There should be a booster for electric vehicles. But at the same time, we're just being practical. There are not enough electric vehicles out there yet. And the auto industry itself needs the support and the money so they can continue to invest and retool to bring them out at the same timeline as they had discussed before. Secondly, we should reform the tax credit for electric vehicles in the light duty sector, 30D. We lay out ways to both increase the pool per manufacturer and sunset it in the future. The third category is for medium duty and heavy duty vehicles, which include, as you've heard, municipal and school buses. Number 1, the ATVM loan program should be opened up to these vehicles. There's money currently sitting there in the ATVM loan program. It's just a matter of changing the regulations. This is an area that is poised for retooling, from Cummins to Navistar to Bluebird to Workhorse to others who are all sitting there and had plans to start rolling out their vehicles, and we want to help make that happen and make that quicker. As you heard, to open up a tax credit for them at 30%, that's number 2. 3 is there's various grant programs. You had heard about low-no grants. There's great opportunities with school buses and airports, and so we should be doing that. Also in the medium and heavy duty category, there's also the form factor of the truck. We do believe that most trucks are cubing out before they're waiting out. As more and more people are ordering things online, this was a problem before. This is carrying a lot of boxes with a lot of air. And by just increasing a small amount the size of each truck, we could take thousands of trucks off the road and actually improve the environment. And so we think this is a regulatory fix that will incentivize turning over that fleet much, much quicker. The fourth area is infrastructure. These are shovel-ready projects, definitely an area we should be focused on. We should take the electric vehicle, the electric charger tax credit, making it refundable is one of the things we recommend, as well as increasing the amount, because more money is being spent on DC fast charging, level 3 charging instead of level 2. And therefore, we should increase that amount. I would just note that whether it be a natural gas or an electric charging company, just as the airlines have no passengers, they have nobody refilling. So we need to make sure that they are viable and continuing the work that they've been doing until now. And we think these are 2 ways of doing that, as well as giving them much more incentive to even move faster and get more jobs. 5th is autonomous vehicles. Many people might say, well, we don't have autonomous vehicles on the road, but let's just say Americans now understand why contactless delivery, as you heard, is so important, and socially isolated transportation. Whether this pandemic goes on for a while, and this will be an important mode of delivery and transportation, or the next pandemic that comes, we should be moving on this, especially because China is moving very quickly, and they have many examples of how they've been using these types of vehicles in this pandemic. We are doing that as well, but most of our vehicles are sitting idle as they should be on the road being tested. So we need to provide a regulatory pathway for that. We need to provide the exemptions of $100,000 per company so that they can build these vehicles and compete with China. This is an $8 billion market that can be stimulated very quickly in the R&D. This is not about reducing safety. Exemptions are not about reducing safety. It's about increasing safety. And these vehicles will ultimately be safer, but we do know that this is where the industry is going, and our companies need to lead. 6, you heard about micromobility, TNCs, transit. We need to save companies that have just been getting off the ground, especially because many of these micromobility companies can deploy a very good, socially isolated way of moving around our cities and getting people back to work safely. Many of them have already invested, as you'll read in the report, in providing free service to our frontline workers at this moment. We should allow this flexible transit dollars, as you heard from Mark, I won't get into that, as well as rethinking how we use our spaces, how we use our bike lanes, increasing those, allowing other types of vehicles. This is an opportunity to rethink those cities. 7, microgrids, battery storage, transmission. We should be expediting the deployment of grid modernization tools. We can be putting and expediting the R&D in cybersecurity. I think people have watched the news and have heard about some of the increased risks that our security agencies believe will happen at this moment in cybersecurity, and the utility sector is one of those, as well as providing a tax credit for transmission that can get clean power to population centers from the middle of our country. It's been too long since we've had a competitive transmission sector. As we continue to use electricity, we need to make sure, right now we use electricity mostly in residential and industrial, and as we now are going to put another sector using electricity, transportation, which we think is a good idea, we just need the most reliable grid we can have. And number 8, I would just say it's about funding of actual, let's say, infrastructure, our roads, our highways. The Highway Trust Fund is definitely going to be low because people haven't been driving. It's also a great time to pave streets. Actually, one's being paved outside my house now because cars are not on the road. It creates jobs right away. But we should do this in a flexible way, not through Tiger and other programs that will take too long. We should get the states move vigorously and fast to get this done. So with that, I will stop, and why don't we open it up for questions? We'll let Greg Rogers discuss, I guess, how to put in questions, and we look forward to working with you all to make this happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Admiral Blair, Adam, and Mark. Everyone feel free to submit questions using the Q&A box. We have one in here currently, and it is, when looking at medium and heavy duty vehicles, especially the class 3 to 8 sizes, what recommendations in the report do you think are most realistic to achieve and most impactful for increasing the market? The second part of this is that, do you see heavy duty's inclusion in the low and no emissions grant program as more impactful than the 30% tax credit for class 4 to 8 vehicles?
So I'm happy to start. Look, I think before this pandemic, I think it is important for people to understand that this is not just an opportunity to try to get things, and we're not looking at it like that. This is a way of getting funding for things that, that, oh, here's an opportunity, I guess as Rahm Emanuel said, don't let a good prices go to waste. I mean, this is a very serious question. We have wasted blood and treasure over the last 4 decades, both with our oil dependence problem, and as Admiral Blair said perfectly, we don't want to go from dependence on that problem, which has drained our country and the lives of many of our young people, to a problem on this supply chain, with China and dependence. So I think it's very important to understand that too, it's such an important industrial sector with over 10 million jobs just in the auto industry itself. And if we can't move our people and goods, we're really nothing as a country. So we really did take it seriously and dismissed policies we thought were not possible. But at the same time, we did take a lot of policies that people have been talking about for a while. So I think we tried to balance those two things. And so people have been talking about how before this pandemic, the medium and heavy duty sectors were poised to move into the alternative vehicle space, or at least particularly into electrification. Now, they have made some gains in natural gas, which I think, should continue. It's an American-made fuel, great. But at the same time, here's an electrification, which will, I think, bolster the entire electric vehicle industry in the United States. Now, many of these vehicles are being built in Europe and China because we have not provided support to the nascent move in this space. And so we have been talking about this 30% tax credit Clearly businesses are wanting to do this, and this would help. But two is, how do we make sure that the manufacturers can retool? And therefore, we looked at the ATVM loan program. We understand that there are some people who don't like the ATVM loan program. There's this idea that no one paid back the loans. Well, maybe there's some issues with Solyndra, but 98% of ATVM loans were paid back. So it's a program that has worked. As you heard, 17 facilities, 35,000 jobs, around 35,000 jobs. So we think that this is a way to get these great American manufacturers, both new ones and existing ones, up and moving. So I would say those are two important areas. And then finally, there's just an oversubscription for money for buses, both municipal and then the school bus area. And so because we can turn over vehicles, right? This is about creating also new demand very quickly. This is an area we should do it. I don't remember the exact numbers are in the report, but maybe something like almost 500 people applied for the Low-No grants, and only like 130 were given because they ran out. It's, I guess, like the first PPP program. People oversubscribed and they had to do a different tranche. So there's another tranche here that can help our cities both and move this sector forward, which is an important sector. Who builds our buses and where they come from, as well as our medium and heavy duty trucks. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Our second question is, first of all, a comment. Incredibly impressive panel and compelling recommendations. The question is, given the politicization of electrified transport, do you see a subset of these recommendations being particularly attractive for bipartisan support?
So I'll start, but then I hope others might talk about it. First of all, I'd say that I see who sent that message, who at one point used to work at SAFE, and so I guess it's a gimme that he says such a great report. So look, I think that this is the thing about SAFE and these types of recommendations is they should not be the most partisan thing happening. That's what's so incredible about the work we've done for so long. Democrats, if they care about the environment, that's where they're leading. Climate change, they should be for these things. And Republicans who are for a strong national security posture and now reindustrializing America, they should be for these things, right? This is really not too difficult to understand. And both of them, forget the climate change context, but from a clean air context in our cities, are for it. So, is it perfect? No, there's no way to move people and goods in a perfect way. But we do know that having a strong economy and strong country is the best way to move forward with any advanced technology, because they cost money. So I do feel that most of these things are set up in a way that both sides should be able to adopt it, because in it, they will be providing, a much stronger base economically, and both from a jobs perspective, but also not tying our economy to the whims of other nations. And secondly, I feel like from an environmental perspective, it's only a win, across the board. And in the end, the United States can do these things if they have the right policies cleaner. I just bring up the rare earth minerals for a moment. One of the reasons that China has this incredible lead is because they don't, in just one province alone, the Chinese government said that it would have cost $5.6 billion in environmental remediation for that refining. So they don't cover those costs. That's why it's cheaper. They don't care. But we can put policies in place to do it cleaner. And so I do feel that even if you're uncomfortable with these things, how can one deny that we can do it cleaner and that we need to do it, or else we'll put ourselves in a bad position? I don't know if others want to speak to the part.
Yeah, Robbie, I would just add, first, I agree with everything you just said, but in terms of the revival and reindustrialization of our economy, when it comes to transit, notwithstanding the benefits, the environmental health benefits and energy benefits that we've discussed for electrifying the transit fleets, there's an economic benefit because in America, under the Federal Transit Administration rules, we have for transit agencies to buy equipment, it must be made in America. We have a Buy America Act. So these electric buses, no matter which manufacturer is producing them, are made here and assembled here in the States, creating jobs. And so I believe we'll get the support from those who are concerned with job creation, getting people back to work, as well as the other benefits you described.
Yeah, Robbie, I would just add that there's a difference between buying toys that are made in China and buying components of your critical infrastructure in your country, whether it be in your telecommunications industry, your transportation, or your energy. And the Buy America Act is an expression of that. Although, of course, it helps certain individual entrenched American manufacturers who may not be the most efficient in the world. But the basic instinct is correct. We don't want important parts of our critical infrastructure to have supply chains that run through countries that are hostile to our interests. If we've learned anything from this coronavirus, I would certainly think it would be that yes, you do have to pay some extra money to be able to be more resilient against the both the things that may happen due to natural causes like the coronavirus epidemic, or things that may be willful, such as manipulation of the American market by hostile countries. So we've just got to build this into our recovery. This is a pay me now or pay me later, and the pay me now is infinitely cheaper, infinitely better for the country than to take these huge reactions when the crisis actually hits.
Let me just say one last thing, which is, whatever people's, I guess, previous views about some of this new technology over the last 15 years, one has to take a fresh look at where the battery prices are, where the performance is. And I think that there's, and where the companies are investing their own money now. And so for whatever reason, this is a trend and probably a certainty. And so it's not a question of if it will happen, but when it will happen, and then who will own this future. And so I think that we have to get beyond the if to the who will own it. And one of the things that's a great advantage here, and I think it's for us and others maybe on this call or listening to understand from a, let's just say a Republican perspective maybe, is there are many opportunities for states that have not yet engaged maybe in transportation in the same way, right? So a lot of these minerals are from states that have nothing to do with the transportation sector or the auto industry. Many of these new battery facilities are being put in states. And so, whether it be, nickel in Minnesota, or it be graphite in Alaska, whether it be rare earth in other places, whether it be new battery facilities that have just been announced in Georgia, Michigan, I just think that there's a lot of opportunity out there for many states. And so if I were a member, I would see this as a way of actually expanding across the United States the footprint of people who are building and contributing to what is, as I say, 3.5% of U.S. GDP is the auto industry, let alone the truck manufacturing industry.
Great. Our next question is, what should the next 100 days look like as the process of recovery starts? And how does SAFE hope to engage with Congress on this proposal?
Robbie, if I may.
Please, Adam.
Sure. The 15-year history of this effort suggests that we have struggled either to galvanize action in between crises, because by definition, there's no crisis in between crises. And we've struggled to galvanize action when we're in a crisis because people are consumed with the crisis. So if you ask me what I look for based on our 15 years of experience that could come out of the next 100 days that we would love to work with all of you on, is how do we generate some real momentum in the direction of getting parts or all of this program adopted, to utilize the hell that the country's gone through to really start to push down a path that answers some of these critical challenges that have been enumerated on this call. Now, there's a lot of other things that need to happen in the country and in the world in the next 100 days. But as Robbie pointed out in the beginning, the United States government has committed to fund at an extraordinary level this recovery. And what we're trying to do here is orient some of that recovery effort towards things that will stand the country in good stead in the years and decades to come.
Great. I would like to remind everyone that the report is available on our website at secureenergy.org/gamma. We just update our website and we have a great new splash page around it. I encourage you to look there for more detailed details on the recommendations. Our next question is, services such as ride-hailing and micromobility companies and car-sharing companies were already struggling prior to the outbreak and may find the post-outbreak economy inhospitable for their business models. Do you see the market for personally owned micromobility devices rising? And should we receive tax credits for e-scooters, mopeds, and other devices?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. First, that there have been challenges to the business model. That's clear. The unit economics have not worked. The cost of managing these shared systems is greater than what they've been charging for the service. However, what they have proven is that tens of millions of trips have been taken. In Austin, Texas, in the first 90 days, over 1 million people rode scooters when they were first introduced. So they are enormously popular, and they are an absolute viable form of public transportation, and they will continue to be part of our mainstream, and increasingly so, especially post-COVID. Bikes are a bit of a return back to the future. Bikes played such an important role in transportation in cities around the world. And by the way, in cities like Amsterdam, Copenhagen, they never stopped being an important part of that transportation system, even in weather conditions that are not ideal, especially winters in Amsterdam or Copenhagen. What will change is the business models will change. There may be more personal ownership of these devices. The infrastructure will improve, and we have the opportunity to make it safer and better and faster now by dedicating increased amount of roadway for bikes and scooters and for making this clean, efficient form of transportation more part of the mainstream.
So I just want to say one thing about micromobility myself, which is I think people need to think about what we see currently, and I have my hangups, like many people who have tripped over a scooter as well. But this is really 1.0 in the future, like many of these technologies. Now, the United States has been leading, which is pretty amazing. We do not have a bike culture, so that we are leading in this technology, and we should not give up that lead in the experimentation of how to use these things. But it's 1.0. Soon there'll be vehicles that are small, single person or delivery vehicles that have covers on them, that are low speed, less mileage, lithium-ion types of vehicles. That is what they showed. If people can get somewhere within a certain amount of miles, you do not need to put a massive battery in it, and people will want to get there. So we do need to make them safer. We need to make them more, the industry itself is going to have to work on continuing to integrate it into an infrastructure that was not built for them. But that's what I mean about thinking about bike lanes, for example. Well, bike lanes, maybe we want more of them now while people are not on the roads, and you can actually, build more, but they should be really micromobility lanes for these future vehicles. Now, they'll coexist with people on bicycles. And I think that that's the question, right? We just want to move people in a safe, cleaner, but definitely, and from our perspective, better energy security way, goods and people. It's the movement that is economic growth that we all want to see, especially as we get out of this. So instead of letting these companies die, I don't think we should bail everyone out, but just to know that this is the first step. We were on something that was something really important in how we're going to change. And so the government should be smart. So like one of the recommendations is to use, transit money that they can actually, give to some of these companies so that they're integrated more even with the transit system. So, they did get bailout money, and there's a way to now bring these in. Because, I just feel like, we shouldn't just think about where things are today, but how quickly they've moved and changed, and they will continue. That's what's so amazing about this transportation space. When we started 15 years ago, there were no electric vehicles, let alone autonomous vehicles. They were not even racing in the desert autonomously and only making 7 miles. It's the one sector that is moving and is so rapidly changing, and we, for security reasons and others, we should be, embracing this and thinking beyond where the bipartisan breakdowns have happened.
Great. And our next question is, what are your thoughts about the upfit of diesel buses to electric?
Well, this is a complicated endeavor to adapt an existing diesel bus and convert a combustion engine into an electric vehicle. I think there's some variations on doing partial conversions, hybrid electric and the like. But I think we're better off using some of the tax credits and some of the opportunities to go full bore in terms of replacing diesel with full electric. And the gains in terms of the amount of pollutants that are emitted from these vehicles and the number of miles driven make this viable even in the world of low fuel prices. So I would go full steam ahead with the conversion to electric. I think a partial upfit is a difficult thing to achieve.
Great. And our next question is, how would you propose prioritizing among the various initiatives in transportation electrification?
Say that again.
How would you prioritize the initiatives we proposed in electrification?
I mean,
Robbie, go ahead.
Look, honestly, I don't think necessarily there's a prioritization in the sense, like, this is the other thing to point out. Many of these things are symbiotic, right? So, but actually also from civilian to defense, right? So take this rare earth mineral idea. These are things that our defense industry need as well. So if we do it for everyone, we should be thinking about that. But similarly between light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty in the electrification space, symbiotic, right? The more component parts, the more cells we are able to build in America, the more electric components, the bigger our market, the more advanced our market, that's the more we're going to be leading, right? I think that we should be thinking that charging, and battery storage, how these things link together, right? It's not which vehicles you charge or how big they are. Yes, there are bigger chargers and smaller, but many of the pieces are the same. And so to me, and I think to us, it's really trying to think broadly about how do you create a big enough market in order for all these parts of the transportation sector to benefit. Because as one company's learning and manufacturing, others will as well. So, it's very important. I will say that, ultimately we do need to get people back to work. And so, although, many people will think, Clash for Clunkers, was it good? Was it bad? Did it work? Did it not? I know there's lots of questions like that. Look, we need to move sales. We need to move municipalities buying more, committing to more. We need to do, all these things, and prioritize things that are built and sold to keep our companies strong, but having them, basically with their moving towards the future at the same time. So I do think that's important. It's not just like starry-eyed to the future technology. It's the here and now, while we're marching aggressively to this future. That's the way I look at it.
I would add, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I want to link this back to the question about what can we accomplish in the next 100 days. So there are elements of this plan that are by their nature more strategic and might take longer, and in certain cases may require legislation out of Congress. There are things like the ATVM program where the change requires apparently a regulatory change. If there are things that can be accomplished in the next 100 days, let's accomplish those things, irrespective of our way of achieving the rest of the plan. Let's make the things that can relatively easily happen.
I totally agree with what Adam just said. I would say that the late, great governor of Maryland, William Donald Schaefer, and mayor of Baltimore had an expression, "Do it now." We have the opportunity here in the next 100 days to do a couple things. One, we can meet with mayors across this country to do what they're doing in London and what they're doing in Milan, and take some of our road network and quickly stand up temporary and then ultimately permanent road space that could increase the use and getting of this micromobility. Number two, we can work with transit agencies across the country to help them restructure these systems now while they're shut down, to think about what they should be looking like when they are reopened, not only in terms of protecting the riders and the drivers, but also eliminating the inefficient routes, and then partnering with other forms of transportation to make a seamless system that can be fully integrated, both in the data for the consumers that can be shared, as well as mobile payment and journey planning. So there are things that can be done very quickly that could have a meaningful impact and make us better coming out of this crisis.
There are things, Greg, I would just say there are things that, won't cost money. I mean, some of these regulatory things with autonomous vehicles, the money is sitting there swiftly. We just have to allow them to be able to move swiftly. Similarly, that ATVM loan stuff, the money is already sitting at DOE. It's just a fix. So let's make these.
Great. We're about out of time, so I'll pass back to you, Robbie, but would like to remind everyone that the report is available on our website, secureenergy.org/gamma, and we look forward to engaging with you.
So I see some questions that weren't answered. How can we help? What can we do? So let me speak to that very quickly. Look, please send this to legislators, policymakers as soon as you can. Please help us, get out the word. There's going to be many reports about this. I think that we try to not be on the not be on one side or the other in the ideological spectrum. So I think it's a unique way of saying it. So hopefully you can get this out. Please reach out to our team so we can also coordinate meetings. We need champions for each of these things, and I think they can each happen. Look, in the end, we need to. I think Republicans, especially when it comes to electrification, need to understand that it's not just an environmental issue. It's very much a competitive issue, and now we have this China component. And they clearly are saying that they are willing to spend money on things that have to do with bringing manufacturing back to America, especially in critical sectors. This is one of them. And so I think that the framing there is important. Same on the Democrat. Look, it's not perfect how you build things. Nothing is the cleanest ever, but this can be done, and we can do that. And so not to get hung up on, how many cars that aren't perfect are being sold, or rare earth minerals, is not, it's going to happen somewhere. So I just feel like people who can carry the message of like, it's a moment for us to roll up our sleeves and not have perfect. But in the end, the system that we're proposing will be cleaner and will have a much better national security impact. And then finally, I'd say this is about jobs. Let's not say anything else. As I said before, massive part of our GDP is, building the cars and trucks we have today and installing the infrastructure for refueling.